We can get started. Good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I'm going to run through the public meeting requirements. Meetings of the ARPA Engagement Committee are public meetings as defined by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act and should follow those guidelines. As a public meeting is held virtually, it will be recorded and made available to view on the DDS website. Committee members must make a good faith effort to state their name and title. I'm Greg McMahon from TDS. Each time they speak during the meeting. If a committee member would like to speak, please raise your hand and one of the co-chairs will acknowledge you. There's no public comment portion to this meeting. Members of the public are able to join, watch, and listen only. So the first agenda on our first agenda item is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. I know Shannon sent those out, so if you've all had an opportunity to look at it. Are there any comments, feedback, changes anyone needs to or recommends? Okay, hearing none, entertain a motion to approve.
Jessica Sundell, DDS Supervisor of Case Management. I motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Okay, anybody not approve? Okay, so all those in favor, I think we already did, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. The primary agenda items for today are two presentations of some of the work Deloitte has been doing, which then again, this is Greg McMahon for DDS, that Deloitte has been doing in and around looking what other state practices have been, other states are doing around their ARPA funding and initiatives, and also some feedback review of some of the stakeholder meetings that Deloitte had been holding through the month of January. So they're going to review those two things for our committee. We'll have time for question and answers, and depending how that goes, that probably will take care of a good portion of the meeting, and then after that we're going to go through one proposed concept on program descriptions. If we can get started, I can introduce Betsy Bella and Julia Oak from Deloitte and let you folks kick it off.
Hello, this is Betsy Bella from Deloitte, and I will start with the stakeholder input sessions and then talk about the current state assessment. I'll pass it to Julia.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Julia Oak from Deloitte. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of an overview of the input sessions that we held throughout the month of January. I'll kind of give a high-level overview, and then given the focus of this committee, I'll focus on a lot of the feedback on the individual and family sessions, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about other sessions as well, if folks have additional questions. So throughout the month of January, our team held a series of 6 stakeholder input sessions. We had 2 sessions for individuals and families, 1 session focused on day services, 1 session focused on residential services, 2 sessions for providers, 1 session for day, 1 session for res, and then also met with the self-advocate coordinators as well as a session with case managers and DDS staff. And so the objective of these sessions was to help us gather some additional information as we're working towards the future stages of moving on. So as many of you all may remember, we've been working on a current state assessment, which was research-based, as well as some interviews, just to get a sense of the landscape in Connecticut, as well as 5 other states. And so the purpose of these input sessions was, again, to get input on some of the things we learned about, and also sort of get a qualitative piece to our research as well. One piece to note is we did looked into hosting a Spanish language session, but given limited interest, we only had one person respond. So we did follow up with that person individually, translated message to let them know that they could send message to our team or send feedback to our team's inbox. And so it's kind of overview of the scope, the cross-session themes across all 6, excuse me, that was sort of key for all stakeholder groups. First being staffing and just the impacts of the workforce crisis, transportation and affordable housing, and just how those limitations, and especially in different regions of Connecticut, just have significant impacts, especially in the context of some of the goals of moving on. And then another 2 pieces that were key across all groups was just the importance of individualizing supports and knowing that everyone needs something different. Those needs may change over time, and just the importance of taking that into consideration and also having flexibility within the system to sort of flex as needed as folks' needs change. And then the last cross-session theme being communication. So given that this is a big transformational effort, a lot of groups spoke a lot about, sort of consistent communication, where can we find more information, and sort of taking that all into account as we're looking sort of the phase 2 of moving on. So that's the sort of high level overview, and then I can speak to a couple more targeted pieces of feedback that we discussed in the individual and family sessions. So in the residential session, again, a lot of the key themes was impacts of workforce crisis, the challenges around a lack of affordable housing, and just that sort of limits an already small pool of accessible housing options if folks are looking at different residential settings. A piece that was sort of highlighted by the group is supportive housing models. I know there's a lot of work in Connecticut currently going on right now around that, but that was sort of a piece that was flagged as a way where folks can, live more independently, but it also provides some of the social interaction and supports if you're still have some individuals that you're living with that may also have intellectual or developmental disabilities, and sort of the theme that was raised is having authentic friends. So I think meaning behind that was just people that are like you, being able to have friends sort of in both areas. And then another sort of specific thread in the residential setting or residential session, excuse me, was we talked a little bit about remote supports. Again, this is something that we looked into a bit in our current state assessment, so we wanted to sort of get a pulse check for some of our findings. And I think sort of the big takeaway from that group is that people are very open to them. They can be very helpful, but sort of emphasis on, some folks don't always know what's available. So having a menu of different types of supports would be helpful. And then also emphasized the importance of sort of having backups in the event that technology fails or Wi-Fi goes out, and sort of still having that in-person potentially backup for remote supports. And moving on to the day session, similarly, the sort of big themes folks spoke to is impacts of the workforce crisis. Transportation was a lot bigger theme in the day services session, just given, transporting folks to medical appointments or different day programs, and sort of the challenges, how challenging it can be to get transportation to different locations. One thing that was really interesting is folks, noted that while competitive integrated employment is awesome, it's not always an option for everyone, really going back to the individualization of supports. So some folks on the line spoke a little bit about, how micro businesses can be a way where you can sort of develop a role or an opportunity for someone to do something they enjoy, that they're passionate about, but may not necessarily be competitive integrated employment. And again, the focus was just around that's not always an option for everyone, and the importance of DDS and moving on, taking that into account just given people's different level of needs. So now that was a lot. I'll pause there. It's kind of the high level overview and then the focus on the sessions for day and residential settings for individuals and families. If anyone has questions or comments.
I see Pat Tyler, this is Shannon Gavino, DDM Buds person. I see that Pat Tyler has her hand raised.
Hi, Pat Tyler, parent. I just want to comment on one thing that you said, and that has to do with backup. This area alone, in my opinion, for families is probably the biggest hole in the system. It's what makes everyone nervous when they go to fully self-directed, that there is no backup system. That's something that an agency should, at least in theory, be able to provide. But once you kind of start spinning off into an independent pathway, I think that conversation around backup and what's going to actually work could be a huge area to look into in the future, because if that problem can get solved, I think it will go a long way to promoting innovative ideas. That's it.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. Just so you know, Pat, we're working on a employment network RFP in conjunction with DSS in order for people to have a database to find staff. And one of the things that we want to see happen is have a backup mechanism built into that, so that the emergency backup might be available through like a rewarding work website. So that we're hoping to be able to address that concern using that RFP. The RFP is a ways away for its in, but that's part of the plan.
Pat Tyler, can I just ask one question about it? Are you referring to just day services or residential also?
Both. Whoever self-directs. This is Greg McMahon, PDF. Okay. Whoever it would be for anyone who self-directs to have access to emergency backup. How that would work, we don't know. That's part of the RFP process.
Great, thank you.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS on Buds person. Can you tell us how many people were in the sessions?
Yep, absolutely. So the individual and family sessions, how I can speak to sort of recruitment first and then can share numbers from each session. So we did a combination of putting information out via DDS social media, and then also worked through the ARC and the Alliance. They sent a note out via their listservs to help increase registration. The sessions, I believe the day session was a bit smaller. It had around 7, and the residential session had around 10 individuals and families. These were small. We were hoping for a little bit of a larger group, and we did, approve. I think I approved around 30 registrations to sort of have a little bit of a buffer for folks that registered but didn't end up attending. But in the end, the groups were small, but I think still good discussion in each.
So you had 30 people sign up, but only 10 attended?
Yeah, that's general. I can look up the specific numbers, but
yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
This is Betsy Bell with Deloitte. I'd also like to note we attended a meeting of the DDS self-advocate coordinators as well and held an input session with them. And that was pretty well attended. That way we could reach both. Since a lot of the sessions were attended largely by families, even though they were for individuals and families, there was an opportunity to make sure we were also hearing from individuals.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. I'm wondering if you had any feedback from the self-advocates that, was in any way different, or if it differed from the families, or if there was any additional information that you got from the self-advocates.
Julia Oak from Deloitte. I think the sort of big thread of the self-advocate discussion, we asked a little bit about, who do you go to when you need to make a big decision? Who do you talk to? Where do you look to get information about if you're looking at, a new support or something like that? And so sort of the term that a lot of them use was, my circle of supports. I think for a lot of folks, that's family, friends. Some individuals noted their case managers or support staff are sort of in their circle. So I think that piece was different. And then they did sort of reiterate, similar to families, of, living more independently is really exciting, but I don't want to be lonely, and sort of the importance of having the social connection. So I think those were sort of the two big pieces from that conversation.
Thank you. This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. I see Kevin has his hand raised.
Yes, this is Kevin Arce, self coordinator for DDS. I'd just like to say that for those of you who don't know, have all of you know about Advocates Corner? I know the people in DDS know it, but I know there's some people who aren't with DDS, because I know that we're talking about, like you say, residential homes and supports for those who need it. Does everyone know what that is, Advocates Corner? I just want to make sure before I explain it. Okay, see nods. I don't see everyone, but yeah. But yeah, basically, for those who don't know, Advocates Corner is basically a place where we self-advocate coordinators of DDS gather information and resources, supports, whatever it is, and put it in the DDS website, or the Advocates Corner of the DDS website. And it has a lot of information regarding not just about advocacy, self-advocacy, but a whole bunch of topics like what else? Budgeting, or maintaining mental health, as well as other things, other resources such as healthy relationship series. Does everyone know what that is? Healthy relationships? Okay. Just want to make sure. I see your thumbs up, Shannon. But basically, I just wanted to bring that up to your attention, because I hear a lot of people today talking about like services and how you say, what's the word, like helping people have social connections, but we have things like self-advocacy groups as well. And we have a lot of things in DDS that we can use, but I don't think a lot of people know about that, about the resources that we have. I think we can solve these problems, but we're not aware of the resources that we have that can help solve the problem, if that makes sense.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. It does. Thank you, Kevin. And that is a really great resource. The Self-Advocates Corner on the website is a really great resource, and it's one that I feel like all of us should really be sending people to. I'm wondering if anybody else, because the groups were smaller, I'm wondering if, since we have people in this group who are family members, advocates, providers, case managers, people who work directly with families, I'm wondering if there's any information, that you think is missing from what was done in the focus groups, or is it on target with what you hear from families that you're working with? If there's any feedback that would be helpful, that would be great. I see that Kevin has his hand raised.
Yes. This is Kevin Arns, self-help coordinator for DDS. I just like to bring to your attention that while many of the information is on point, we in the advocates side of DDS, we have noticed that there's some information out of date, but that's something we're working on, just to let you know. But when it comes to how you say, not just self-advocacy, but also like basically supporting individuals with disabilities, we have a lot of resources there. I encourage all of you to at least check it out. It's in case you don't know, it's just the the bottom left screen of the home page of the DDS website.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. I don't see anybody who has their hand raised. One thing, though, I do want to kind of go back to is when you met with the self-advocate coordinators and they talked about their circles of support. I think that that is a concept that we don't often talk about for people. But I think it's a really important thing, especially if we're looking to people moving towards more independent living settings. Having those circles of support and people being very conscious about, knowing that when someone's making a change in their life or they're moving to more independence, that having a circle around them, a circle of advisors who can assist them is something important. And I think it's something that, we should maybe flag in terms of our recommendations, that that idea is something that we really need to, I think, talk more about when we're working with people, in my opinion. Any other questions or comments? I see Kevin RSA has his hand raised.
Again, yes. Kevin Arce, Suffolk coordinator. Again, I'm probably taking everyone's spotlight, and I apologize to them, but I just wanted to say that basically, like I for one know what you're talking about, Shannon, because for example, I'm not with DDS. I'm on the wait list, but I do have a job with them, and as a result, I can't, like, how you say, have the same support as some other people, if you know what I mean. I do have succeeded, but when it comes to, like, say, living independently, or how you say, trying to work my way towards in more independence, is becoming a challenge for me. And as a result, I have to, you know, basically, it's a really hard thing to do when it's hard to find the supports that you need. I mean, not everyone is able to, how you say, just live independently, be on their own, and that's it. Because it's a hard process, and an even harder thing to get used to if you're used to, being with family or friends.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS and Buds person. Thank you, Kevin. Anybody else before Betsy and Julia move on?
This is Greg McMahon, TDS. Julia, did you have any other areas on the surveys you wanted to cover in or around the family groups?
The surveys that was handled by McDowell, but I can share that the communications, a different consulting company that's handling a lot of communications, they sent out a survey to individuals and families, I believe in congregate day and congregate residential settings. And we have had really good return rate on the surveys via mail. I believe, and Betsy, correct me if I'm wrong, it's around 10% from mailed back, and then I don't know off the top of my head the percentage of folks that did it online, but I think the piece to share is that that's in progress, and we did have really good response rate, but we're not the main individuals managing that, so I don't have, unfortunately, more specific information off the top of my head.
This is Betsy Bella with Deloitte. We can move on into the current state assessment. We will be receiving the survey results. We also have a survey out to providers, and there's also a survey for DDS staff. And all that information will help to inform our next steps. Oh, sorry, before we move on, it looks like Cheryl has her hand up.
Good morning. Cheryl Ellis, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion with DDS. I'm just wondering if we know the diversity of the pool of individuals who participated in the sessions.
Thank you, Dr. Etlow.
Yeah, this is Julia from Deloitte. Just to clarify your question, Cheryl, is it around sort of like who joined and sort of mix of age, gender, race, that type of, in that regard, or?
Yeah, so in terms of ethnic, racial diversity, in terms of regional diversity and age, and possibly gender, if you have that breakdown.
We did not collect self-reported identity. I will say for regional diversity, when we were looking at registrations, we did make sure that we had a mix across each region. And unfortunately, and I don't feel comfortable saying observed race or gender folks on the call. I will say a lot of individuals did have their videos off. So that also makes it a little bit harder, but I think the short answer is we did not collect self-reported data on people's identity during registration.
Thank you.
This is Betsy Bell with Delight. The surveys for individuals and families are collecting demographic information. So we will have it there, which is encouraging. Since we approved almost every registration for the individuals and families, we were just taking whoever we could get. Didn't have a large enough pool to be making sure that we were sort of helping to sort for diversity beyond regional.
This is Shannon Giacomino, DDS ombudsperson. I know that, you know, in terms of outreach and being able to reach people, I still don't think that we have addressed or solved the issue of how to reach people we haven't typically reached. So, you know, for instance, I know that the ARC is, you know, the list that the ARC has is not necessarily representing the diversity of the community, not in you know, in a way that I think we want to. And so I think that that's still sort of a question and an issue, is how are we reaching people that we don't typically reach, you know? And I think that we haven't really got to the bottom of that yet.
This is Betsy Bella. Thank you, Shannon. Yes, absolutely. I will say for the Spanish language outreach, we did also coordinate with case managers because we recognize that the audience we were trying to reach there is likely not on some of those other lists. And then the survey should have reached a broader group. Unfortunately, with the timing, we couldn't do our stakeholder input session outreach through the mail. Okay, anything else on the stakeholder input sessions?
This is Shannon Giacomino, DDS ombudsperson. I do want to say, though, I think that even though the sample was small, a lot of what you captured seems to be pretty accurate in terms of what I've heard from families over the years. And I really think that, like I said, the circle of friends, and I think the piece that both families and self-advocates talked about, that socialization and the fear of people being alone or being lonely, is something that we really have to, I think, flag and really think about, because that was reflected from both groups. And I don't know that we always think about that when we talk about how people are going to transition and that piece. I mean, it's built into supported living, but it's not necessarily built into other types of supports.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. I just wanted to add one thing because Julie, you had mentioned that people talked about supportive housing as an option that may help people who typically wouldn't live on their own. And it's just sort of as an update in that area. There is a notice of opportunity going out for providers to have what would be called a non-project based supportive housing. So when Steve Morris presented to our group back in the fall, the supportive housing he was presenting were brand new developments, working with developers to build buildings and to begin new programs. This notice of opportunity is to do the same, very close to the same service in existing buildings without building new ones. And one of the advantages of that, probably a primary advantage of that, is it takes years to get from the idea to the production of supportive housing with new buildings. If we can set up something with existing complexes and have supportive housing expanded that way, it's faster because the buildings are there and you don't work through that process. So just to address that area of concern, or that area that families raised, that's one way we're working on trying to expand that.
Right, this is Betsy Bella with Deloitte. I do want to note, although we talk about how the groups weren't as large as we had hoped, the plan was always for relatively small input sessions with we were aiming for 20 people, right, in a few breakout groups. And the importance of that is because these were qualitative, discussion-based input sessions, and you can't do that with 100 people on the line. And so we were looking to, so we wish we had more voices and a greater diversity of voices, but it wasn't as if we were trying to have 100 people. Just for a little additional context for folks. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And here we go. So we just wanted to have a little conversation today. Thanks for having us. Provide a brief overview of the current state assessment report. This went out by email. You should have received a copy, including highlighting a few of the leading practices that it mentions. We're also available for questions and discussions. We look forward to your thoughts. This report was created with the guidance and review of DDS. The purpose of the report is to collect information and best practices about public community-based services transformations and other state IDD systems to inform the design of the Moving On initiative. This includes information on how promising approaches to service delivery, how to motivate change, and ideas for how other state departments have supported stakeholders through their processes. So if you open it up, you saw it's about 60 pages, and it has a government audience in mind. DDS has also chosen to share it more broadly, which is really exciting. We're glad that you all get to read it. The executive, and so this is just an overview of what are some of the pieces. The executive summary has the sort of key details and information, including a table with considerations and recommendations. If you're opening up the report and thinking this is just too much, just read that chunk, right? And then the research findings is most of the report. It's got explains what the main areas of research were. It has a table highlighting some of the findings by state. Again, if you don't have time for the full report. And then it includes reporting on the most relevant information from the research. Like any research report, we found a lot more information in the research process than could be included in the report or than would make sense to. And so the report really focuses on what are the pieces that could be most actionable. What information can help inform decisions on what to do. So, and then the appendix, this includes the resources for the report, as well as the waiver definitions from certain services that come up in the report. So states offer often similar services, but they'll have different names. Sometimes they have services that have the same name that aren't the same service. And so the residential service section highlights services that are similar to or have similar names to Connecticut's shared living or community and companion home services. And then the other service definitions are just pieces that were a little more unique or otherwise of interest for these efforts. So that's kind of like a quick reference piece. That's why the appendix is so lengthy, is those service definitions. So the report just focuses on 5 states in Connecticut. We wanted to keep our focused. The states are Arkansas, Delaware, Maine, Missouri, and Pennsylvania. The emphasis was specifically on HCBS transformation because the research is intended to inform a transformation initiative, the Moving On program. The research included looking to see if changes to waivers through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, waiver amendment process would be necessary. One of our big findings across the board that we confirmed with DDS is that the Connecticut IDD waivers really offer significant flexibility to provide supports already that are more individualized, include more independent settings. They're not necessarily being utilized equally throughout the state, but a lot of the pieces that were coming up in other states, those efforts can be done within the existing waiver framework. And so the report focuses on ways to enhance and offer more choice in these more independent settings based on the lessons learned in other states and from some Connecticut providers. This is just a quick visual of that shows the interviews conducted. In some cases, these are multiple interviews within the state, but just we just list them in office. The appendix has the full details. And then in Connecticut, DDS identified the Connecticut partners to interview. Okay. So these are the categories included in the considerations and recommendations table that's in the executive summary. We'll share a few items from each on the next slides, but just an overview of what these are. So individuals who receive supports as the primary focus. This is, as you know, a priority for DDS. It was also a key theme throughout the research. Is really this importance of person-centeredness and how do we make sure to not lose sight of the people whose lives this most impacts as DDS works with providers, individuals, and families on these efforts. Residential supports and employment supports. Moving on, focuses on these two areas. You will note it does say employment supports, not day and employment supports. In the research, the focus really was on competitive and great employment, and past that, take people to that end goal. As well as some of the pieces like micro businesses that were touched on. For how can DDS provider engagement, which is, how can DDS partner with, motivate, and support providers in these efforts? The Moving On initiative isn't something DDS can do alone. Assistive technology and remote supports. These were research focus, and this highlights ways people are using them to promote independence and make sure people have the supports they need. And the payment methodology, we are actually continuing research specifically into outcome-based payments, but the report includes some information on how states have incentivized transformation and how they look to sustain efforts. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the good stuff, right? Some of these leading practices. I will say this is not the full table for the report. The report also includes considerations. These are, things that are important to keep in mind. Concerns that might be popping up, potential obstacles, or just important information, as well as then the leading practices for each area. And then the report also includes additional leading practices in each area. But for individuals who receive supports as the primary focus, some that we wanted to sort of bring to your attention today is enhanced training for DDS case managers. Something that, and this has really been enhanced already by the input sessions across every input session. Everyone's worried about the case managers, including the case managers. So that importance of they need to have the information about what's coming, what's changing, because otherwise the people who are trying to make decisions about their own lives and their families won't have that information. So how can they have the information they need? How can they partner with providers so that folks have access to that full range of supports and make sure that there's good information in the person-centered planning? Reviewing and revising or developing additional transition-specific shared responsibility documents. This is something that the Connecticut Money Follows the Person program already does and uses that might serve as a model. That idea being before somebody moves either residentially or in day services into a more independent setting, with that comes potential new complications, new responsibilities, potential risks even. And so what's the plan for how someone is going to work through each of those if they're coming up? And making sure that everybody involved in the process signs it. So, this is an important document. It's important to keep in mind. On residential supports, again, back to the idea of there are existing flexibilities. So continue to allow providers those flexibilities, help to enhance and promote them on how to use creative residential approaches and tools. And then specifically encourage providers to adopt and expand clustered supportive housing, assistive technology, and remote supports. And then, a big obstacle of moving into a more independent setting can be just finding affordable housing, affordable, accessible housing. And so building on and expanding housing voucher programs to strengthen sustainable rent and utility support for folks. When we are looking at employment supports, again, continuing this flexibility and specifically encourage providers to adopt remote supports for customized employment. Develop annual statewide employment goals. And this could even include a focus on employment goals related to transition age youth as they are leaving high school and coming into adult services and supports. And focusing on increasing the percentage of individuals with IDD who are participating in the workforce, especially in competitive and great employment. And then support providers to leverage and expand their network of business partners. And this really was echoed pretty strongly in the input sessions as well, right? This idea that people don't know which employers might work well, might be willing to provide good jobs. And so how do we help connect providers to the business partners in their communities so that they can increase the availability of jobs, helping business partners to understand that there are tax benefits as well as other less tangible benefits of providing these kind of employment opportunities as well. Provider engagement. So something, this specifically comes out of Missouri. They had a lot of success with an employment effort where they had identified milestones and benchmarks, goals to hit. And if providers exceeded these goals in terms of the employment supports they were providing, because what they saw is early on is there were folks where there was a real gap between the people responding to surveys saying, I'm interested in employment, and the people who were receiving any kind of employment service. Not even people who had jobs, just who were receiving or even had it in their person-centered plan in terms of, I want to work towards employment. And so they said these goals for providing more employment services to help get people on that path towards employment. And as providers were exceeding the goal and doing really well, the state was writing up a press release congratulating them. They had a ribbon system, so they would get a purple ribbon and they could display this on their website. They could say we're a purple ribbon provider. And that would help people who were looking for providers to know, oh, this provider is doing a good job or doing better than the goals and helping people to find employment. And so this sort of non-financial recognition, right? They didn't pay them any money for this, but they were having celebratory parties. They were writing up the press release. They were giving them this designation. And it actually created a lot of motivation, and providers were looking for how they could make sure to be one of the providers that was seen as really strong in this area. And then holding calls where providers can share updates on what's working well for them in moving on efforts to make sure that, if somebody's got a great idea, perhaps that idea can be spread out more broadly to help more people. Assistive technology and remote supports. People can be nervous about it, and that makes sense. People need time to learn how to use it and to make sure it's right for them. And so providing a trial period where people can test it out, figure out how they feel about it before it becomes something that they're relying on as much. And creating a technology task force. DDS is hiring a statewide assistive technology director. And so this is something that they could work on to develop tailored education materials and help people understand, how do we really use these tools? And it should include people who actually use them day to day. Okay. And then payment methodologies. So if consider a lot of states, it's called pay for reporting, right? It's reporting takes time and energy and staff. And so providing some incentives to help make that easier, to be able to collect the data, to understand, what really is doing well. That's one piece. And then if there is, a lot of success with these transformations and transitions, and if there is funding, consider temporarily extending some of the transition incentives. Okay. Stop sharing my screen. So we supported the DDS input sessions in January, as Julia covered in depth, and we gathered stakeholder input on elements from this research and the initiative, the moving on piece as a whole. We're currently working with DDS to refine the research based on the stakeholder input, including the survey results that are still coming in, meetings with DDS leadership, and also even things that we hear when we come to committees like this, into a specific transformation model. So like the nitty gritty of how does this get done? So it's going to highlight routes to transformation. It's going to emphasize DDS support and tools for providers and other stakeholders for these changes. And there'll be more details coming on this soon. So you'll see us again, maybe even sooner than you want to. All right, questions and comments?
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS Ombudsperson. Pat Tyler has her hand raised.
Hi, Pat Tyler, parent. One of my questions probably seems ridiculous, like I should know the answer to this, but I have two questions. One is, what is the mission of this document that you're creating? In other words, what is it meant to achieve? That's question one. And my second question is, what was the process in choosing which states you decided to do comparisons on?
Great. Betsy Bella. Thank you, Pat. That's not a ridiculous question. It means I wasn't clear enough in my presentation. So let's circle back to it. The purpose of this document was, it's really more about the research. And so the research is intended to inform the route for what does the Moving On initiative look like? What tools and support can DDS provide? What routes and approaches should be recommended to providers, or should providers be helped to work through? How do we make sure to continue to center individuals and their families? And so this research is to make sure that DDS, there's a lot of really bright minds at DDS, but when you're gonna make sure that you're making huge investments, you want to make sure that there's some evidence base and some research that goes into it. And so creating that groundwork, that foundation of information and research for the decisions that are going to create the framework of how the Moving On program really works as we roll into phase 2. And then the states were selected. We worked with national experts and also did a scan to identify, including the National Association, I always forget what NASD said, National Association for State Directors for Developmental Disability Services, NASDs, was the largest membership organization focused on IDD in the country. And so we talked with them about, who would you recommend for this kind of scan? We're looking at IDD, home and community-based services transformation. They put forward some names. We worked with some of the experts on our team. Where have you been seeing progress and change recently? Who has interesting things going on? And then completed a scan that highlighted information on, who is served within the system, how many people are involved, what's the structure of it, what kind of services and waivers are in place, because, and that's part of what, if you look at like California, that was one of the states we considered, but California has a very specific, they have many regions throughout their state, and their services are very decentralized. And just how their day-to-day functions is very different from how it does in Connecticut. And so it was decided, that might not be the best comparison. It might be harder to take lessons from California and apply them to Connecticut. And so looking at states that are more similar, looking at states that have similar sizes, another issue with California, and where so to identify states where there might be something interesting to learn, and where those lessons would feel applicable inside the Connecticut system. Does that make sense?
Pat Tyler, parent. Yes and no, in the sense that, some of the things I was looking at while you were talking on the web, like policymakers that do analysis of the states that are best for people with IDD to live in. Like, I think it would have been interesting to pick the states that are at the top of the leaderboard and do a comparison that way, because I think you had Arkansas on there. I'm not sure. It's not typically rated in a very high manner, so I'm not sure what you get out of looking at them. And also noted in my quick view of that slide was, I didn't see the neighboring states to us that probably have the closest demographics. Like, I didn't see Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York. So I think that would have also been interesting. And then my last comment, which is comment number 3, which I tried to do before you got going. Thank you for your answer to the question about the purpose of your work. It's much clearer to me now. I also just wanted to say, in terms of gathering information from groups, since we've been talking about that, it occurred to me after the discussion was winding down on that note, we always have formats and then we try to invite people to the format. And I was thinking it would be interesting if we brought the format to the people and tried a completely different way of doing it. So I know when a million years ago, when I worked for USAID in Farmington, that what we used to do is actually make appointments, call people and do the interview. It could take like 10 minutes of someone's time. And it was a lot more reliable that the person was going to show up if they had an appointment. It may, at a first blush, appear more labor intensive, but you could probably knock out 10 of these, in an hour and a half if you knew, if someone made an appointment and said, I'm going to call you at 10 o'clock in the morning because that's a convenient time for you and ask you these questions. So I just wanted to throw that out. I mean, the commonality is that we create formats and want people to come to it. And I want to suggest maybe we can do it in reverse, like find people who are interested and bring it to them and go in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. This is Betsy Bella. I should have noted and included that we did also look at, some of those lists, looking at the National Core Indicator Survey, about, who are some of the states that are sort of generally seen as strong in the IDD world. And although you can certainly find lists of people who are trying to say that so-and-so is the best or that it falls this way, really it is hard to rank systems against one another. Just there's too many elements and pieces that go into it. And, someone might be strong on employment and weaker in residential or, those sorts of elements. And so it was, given the nature of this work that it was seeking to inform, really looking for where are there some innovative, interesting pieces, as opposed to necessarily, who's got the perfect system, since it doesn't exist. But yes, thank you for those insights and input.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. I mean, I think Connecticut is generally seen as a state that's a leader. And, obviously we know that there are a lot of areas where we need to improve, which is one of the reasons why we're engaged in this process. I also do want to point out, not to just, go point for point, Pat, but 20 people, actually 30 people signed up and did have an appointment to come to that group, and 20 of those people didn't show up. And so I find that to be very disappointing because, people actually signed up for something and made the time or knew what the time was and then didn't come. So I think that that's disappointing because that input is important. One thing that you talked about in the provider area was the idea of giving ribbons or providers being able to designate themselves as a purple ribbon provider stuff. I love that idea. I think there is so little information out there right now that helps families and individuals to be able to, know how effective a provider is at doing what it is they say they do. So I love that. And I think it's a great idea across the board. I think families are sort of hungry for some objective data on providers, and it just doesn't exist out there. So that's great. I see Adriana has her hand raised.
Good morning, Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network and Relative. I'm glad you brought that up, Shannon, because I was going to talk a little bit real quick. I'm in another sub work group with DDS and talking about customized employment and some other things. And one of the things that we had suggested a couple months ago was having a scorecard system for providers based on just like you do with restaurants. You walk in, they love posting their A, B, C, D, and it's a way to have friendly competition, helping to move results, services to a newer standard, and basically trying to see if people and providers will pivot or who will step up to the game or who is new. And it also helps to families kind of understand in a quick glance when they're looking at providers, just to see some details on what that scorecard means. And it could be a combination of satisfaction from families on results, but some key indicators on results that DDS is looking for as far as programming. And it's a quick scan. And sometimes we could look outside of IDD for systems that can be implemented into just as a simple scorecard that people are used to seeing certain types of scoring or programs or how to deliver, get people to a meeting. And yes, people, I know I'm switching real quick, but people are sign up for a lot of things. And depending on how many times, I'm not sure if there was a reminder set for the meetings or anything like that, but for a lot of people, because we have that in our set, we have better results sometimes when you do send a couple of reminders or that morning. But I do like the idea of the scorecard because that has been brought up. So maybe it'll come into fruition with this end of it, suggesting it, the other work group outside of ARPA suggesting it, and come to a better system for parents, family, caregivers to really at a quick glance see where they want to go. And it also helps the providers kind of set new standards for themselves and be proud of the work that they're doing and showing that they're meeting the needs of DDS. They're not just it's not just a general blanket, I provide day services. It's kind of like you see Google, you see scoring of doctors, you see scoring of it because everybody has a wide under certain umbrella. But what is it that is bringing you to the next level to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Thank you.
Betsy Bella, thank you so much, Adriana. Yes, the scorecard is something that we actually included in the provider survey, asking for their interest on it, along with a list of sort of like other tools and resources. Not a very popular idea among providers, but that doesn't mean it can't get some traction and momentum. The data collection that goes into a scorecard can be complicated, but I think it's certainly an interesting idea. Thank you for your thoughts. And we did send reminders on the appointments. I mean, things come up, but yeah, thank you. Always an important piece.
Yeah, I mean, 2/3 of the people, this is Shannon Giacomino, DDS ombudsperson, two-thirds of the people who signed up didn't come, which makes it difficult because I think DDS is often criticized for not being open or not being transparent. And, well, I think we have a lot of room for improvement with communication around this initiative. I do think that there is a genuine attempt to get feedback. And so when those opportunities exist and people don't take advantage of it, people have to own their own behavior as well. Cheryl Ellis has her hand raised.
Hi, I want to thank you for the thoughtfulness in the process and outlining some key points for us. I agree with a lot of the sentiments that have been said around the scorecard. I know there are a lot of discussions happening at various levels. I'm in other meetings, such as Adriana mentioned, where they're talking about a scorecard or some type of grading system. There's a lot of work and thought that goes into developing that as a kind of standardized requirement. But I also know there's accrediting bodies that have a component of that. And I was just wondering if that is something that's being considered as part of the thought process or planning process.
This is Betsy Bella. Thank you so much. Yes, we're certainly aware of those pieces. So as DDS selects and decides on specific recommendations, then the next stage is, okay, so what does implementation look like? And so let's say at a DDS leadership decides we do want to move forward with a scorecard. Of course, it's moving in a couple of different pieces and places. But then that support moves into some of those pieces like, okay, so do you want to use some of the national core indicators, survey data? Do you want to use some of these pieces? And so, this report is higher level. And then the next stages do get into more of the nitty gritty of how to make it happen. What are the most streamlined processes to get it done? So if you're reading through the report, you're like, well, how would that really work? It is pulling from places where it has been done successfully. And so then to go back and dig into deeper on exactly how and where it might be appropriate and mesh into Connecticut.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
This is Shannon Giacomino, DDS Ombudsperson. Adriana, you still have your hand raised. Did you want to speak again?
Sorry, legacy.
Okay. Then Denise Palladino.
Palladino, SD Director, DDS. I did want to kind of provide some feedback that DDS does currently have something similar to a scorecard, which is our each of the providers has a financial fiscal meeting and a quality meeting yearly, in which they are, I hate to say ranked, but they do receive scores in certain competency areas. So anyone at any time can go on the DDS website and look up each individual quality provider. And at the bottom of their profile, you'll see a link that I think it says, let me just open it. Quality profile. So you can go on there and you can click on the quality profile and you can see some of the areas, the focus areas, planning and personal achievement for individuals, DSO, GSE, whatever service they provide as a vendor. You can go in there and you can see what they've kind of scored in. They don't have it comparatively against other providers, but they have their own individual score on there. So I just wanted to kind of thanks.
That's Bella. That's awesome. Thank you, Denise. That sounds like it could be a groundwork, a framework to help build from to create a scorecard that's more accessible and user-friendly.
Yep. This is Shannon Giacomino, DDS Ombudsperson. Denise, could you share the link to that? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Denise Baldino. Let me grab the link. I'll put it in the chat. I'll start with just one of the providers right now. I'll do abilities without boundaries. Okay, I'll put it in here. And then once you click that link and the form opens at the very bottom, you'll see the quality profile that you can click on, and it'll bring you to kind of like that functioning adaptive kind of scoring area.
Shannon Giacomino, DDS Ombudsperson. Thank you. That is great. I'm looking forward to looking into that. Lena had put a question in the chat. Can we do some meetings in person? Lena, did you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, Lena Esposito from Connecticut Family Support Network. Yes, I've been seeing that right now, people wanted to start meeting in person. Then I was thinking maybe we can have, I don't know, I feel like maybe we can have a little more connection. I don't know, it may be the other members, they would agree, but I feel that maybe we get together, maybe we can get more ideas. We're sitting down and, it's just a kind of suggestion. Thank you.
This is
DDS. I think that the commissioner has been doing a number of different forums of late, and initially was beginning to want to organize sort of a in-person and a virtual for each, and then as Then COVID decided to make a little comeback, and he decided that it may be better not to do the in-person right now. But I think that's on the radar of the commissioner, certainly, to start getting, when it's safe, getting back to the in-person meetings and more face-to-face. We did offer the opportunity to come into a site for the stakeholder groups. So we, to set up a virtual meeting, but at a site for anybody who might have been struggling with technology. But nobody asked for that. We actually didn't have to set up any sites. Everybody else, anybody who signed up apparently had the technology to participate that way.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. Jessica has her hand raised.
Jessica Sandell, DDS Supervisor of Case Management. So I have to say, just going back to the conversation about the ribbons, which I wrote down too, because I really think it's amazing. And the thought of being able to look at, I mean, our list of providers is so extensive. The thought of going into each one of those profiles, although it's a great resource, I think is just unrealistic when you think about how busy our parents are, parents, guardians, family members. I love the idea that a different ribbon, maybe associated with a different color, would denote where they're excelling in what areas, whether it's, with employment or with IHS supports, with remote supports, however those, the criteria for being, accomplished in that area. But just to have that quick reference to be able to see a list and say, oh, well, who are the purple ribbons in this area? Who are the blue ribbons? And so anyway, it was just sort of feedback, but I thought that was a great idea. And I think it incentivizes providers to do a good job too. So that's it.
It's Betsy Bell at Deloitte. Thank you, Jessica. No, that was definitely a piece. Is they actually did it for the provider incentives, and then they saw afterwards, oh, this is actually really valuable for individuals and their families. Something that there is like a little caution is providers who are behind the ball sometimes actually lose motivation because they're like, oh, I can't hit that goal. And so so it just, the importance of, with a system like that, also making sure to provide extra support to those providers to help people along.
So that's interesting. Jessica Sundell, Supervisor of Case Management for DDS. That's interesting. Although in my head, I'm thinking like if you had, a variety of different ribbons because some providers just provide only some supports in certain areas. Some are really good in some areas and not so great in other areas, that I'm thinking probably every provider could attain a ribbon in one of the categories, be good at something. You have some great providers out there that just really miss the mark on employment or really miss the mark on IHS or don't even offer IHS. I think it's something to consider. So thank you.
That's that's an excellent point. And I think too, because we're hearing people get a lot of their information from their peers, from other people who are receiving sports. But what if what your friend needs help with support with is different from what you need support with? And so who is a really great provider for them might not be a great provider for you.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS ombudsperson. I see that Pat has her hand raised, and I will just sort of say that I hope that you bring our feedback back to your discussions with the leadership of DDS on this, because, while there might be nuances to that, I hope that you're hearing loud and clear from the perspective of the people who use these supports. It's something that they want. Pat?
Sorry, Pat Tyler, parent. Two things. So there's an organizational development modality called appreciative inquiry, where organizations make changes by starting at the bottom, or the people that are doing the service or receiving the service. So I just want to give a plug back to the comment about people not showing up at that meeting. I agree, people are responsible for their behavior. And I also think behavior is a communication. So I'm curious what it means. And I don't know that we know what it means. I mean, it could mean that they got busy. It could mean they don't think their voice makes any difference anyway. I mean, there's like a million reasons why only 1/3 of the people showed up. So I think if we want to transform the way the communication system works and is more reciprocal, we need to dig into what are the reasons people aren't showing up and look for other modalities for people to participate. There are people culturally and just personality wise that even when they show up in a group have a really hard time speaking up. That's just not the way they do it. However, speaking to another parent who asks the same questions, they may feel more free. So I just want to like open our minds to there's more than one way to get data from the people doing the services and not kind of get stuck in the one trick pony for all, because what we really want is as much diversity and response as possible. So we have to be able to look to different ways to do it, maybe ways we haven't even tried yet. And the appreciative inquiry model, and the reason I keep mentioning that is that they don't have they have people in this model, parents and people receiving services actually ask the questions of other people. And for some people, just that, power equalizing is enough to make them feel comfortable to participate in answering questions. So it's something to look into. And then lastly, my comment is regarding the blue ribbon, yellow ribbon, which I think is a great idea. My only statement on that is let's not have the ribbons be only determined by an outside system. Let's have the feedback from the people receiving the services be as important as the people delivering them. And this is going to be a major cultural change for agencies, because let's face it, right now, short of someone dying or something really going wrong in an agency, there's not a lot of incentive to make an agency accountable to whatever we come up with, other than putting them on enhanced supervision. So if we want to have families and clients receiving services feel that they have some power in the situation, they should at least be part of the design of the questions that determine what makes a blue ribbon person and what makes someone a yellow ribbon. That's my piece. Thank you.
Pat, I think that's a fabulous idea. Me as an individual, not as a representative of DDS, certainly, but thank you for that. And back to Shannon's comment. Yes, there's a reason we always send two people these calls. When one of us is talking, the other's taking notes. So we're taking this feedback back. We're recording. We are, we know you take minutes, but we want to make sure to capture these key insights, these wonderful pieces, the enthusiasm, the comments from you all to help inform the decision making.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Joanne has her hand raised.
Thank you, Joanne Melise, Living Innovations. I am intrigued about this ribbon reward system. I have absolutely no doubt that the provider will have pushback on it, because how do you do it objectively? How do you do it not too subjectively? And to me, the question that I would pose is, I see a lot of the challenges in Connecticut being systems and overregulation. And as the commissioner said on the forum that I was able to join, the complexity of doing business in Connecticut. If he had a nickel for each complexity, he'd be a very rich man. And I appreciated that. The fact that somebody might or an agency might function well within a very convoluted system is not necessarily meaning that they're doing quality work. And I look at these ARPA funds as an opportunity to hopefully do systems change. So before we look to ribbons and reward systems, it kind of reminds me of things we used to do with people and hopefully not are doing anymore. Your STAR program. What are we doing to do the systems change? And this ARPA should be about it. What are we doing about being innovative? What are we doing about looking at all those states, both in New England and elsewhere? They're doing state-of-the-art stuff that we should be doing, and stop being tied by this over-regulation that stops us from getting from point A to point B efficiently. Thank you.
Betsy Bellett. Thank you, Joanne. Important point, well made.
I think, yeah, this is Frederick being DDS. Shannon, looks like you're muted.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS on Bud's person. I see that Pat has her hand raised. Oh, this is Shannon Giacovino, DDS on Bud's person again. You know, just to sort of piggyback on what Joanne was saying, I think that that's true. I think that we have a lot of flexibility in terms of what can be offered through the waivers, but we do have a lot of complexity and restrictions in terms of being flexible. You know, I mean, that was another common theme. And the ability to be flexible and to innovate and to really create a person-centered plan. I think we still have a system where we, even if as we try to innovate, we create a box. We're creating more boxes, but we're not necessarily trying to figure out how to make the system work to meet people where they're at, and to help them to work through the plan that maybe they come up with that doesn't fit into one of the boxes that we've created. And that's where, you know, I think it's great that we are creating all of these other options, and I think people really like it. But I think we haven't yet, and we're not really, I think, through this process, looking at what I'm saying, which is if somebody comes to DDS and they have an idea, how do we, about how what they want their life to work to look like, but it doesn't fit into some of the silos that we've created in terms of what the system offers. How do we make that work for them? How can we make the funding that's available through DDS and maybe community first choice and, you know, other kinds of systems that they're a part of sort of come together to help them do what they want to do, and to realize their vision. And so I think kind of understanding all of that is really important. And some of that is understanding how DDS funding interacts with funding from other places as well, that people get, and how that can all be kind of put together to create a plan around a person. Joanne Melise has her hand raised.
Thank you, Shannon. Joanne Melise, Living Innovations. Thank you, Shannon. I loved what you were talking about of the boxes and the silos that we have in the system. And you know, when I think about this group and residential, you know, what are we doing to move to a person-driven system where people are educated about different choices and options and that they are truly there? I would look to a neighboring state that's using ARPA funds for innovative pilots that may or may not be able to be integrated at the end, you know, thinking outside the box and being person driven, and how do we improve and change the system? I think in Connecticut, we're just so used to doing things the way that we do them. And again, micromanaged and overregulated, that creativity is very, very hard. And we got to keep up with the times and where people are and what the economic realities are of a staffing-based system. Thank you.
Betsy Bellett, Greg, you're muted.
Yeah,
And thank you, Joanne.
This is Greg McMahon from DDS. Are there any other questions or comments on any of these areas? We do have one other agenda item although I'm not sure we've left enough time to give it justice, Shannon. So but before I move on to that, are there any other comments, questions in regard to what Deloitte has presented to us or the other conversations we've been having so far? We have a comment, this is Greg McMahon from DDS, a comment from Adriana saying, look to DDS case managers that have been creative and able to deliver person-centered support as highlighting them so that others can learn from their creativity.
Betsy Bella, and that's something we actually heard in the input sessions, where case managers are looking for their opportunities to learn from their peers.
Yes.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you very much, Betsy and Julia. This obviously got some good conversation going. Very much appreciate your presentation. Thank you. So moving to our other agenda item, Shannon and I have been working on kind of trying to figure out how to jumpstart the idea that has come up from our committee multiple times about developing easy to find and understand descriptions of services that are available to people we support. And a couple of meetings ago, we kind of threw up the waiver definition for IHS, which prompted some conversation and confusion around IHS being in many settings. So Shannon, I took a stab at just trying to figure out a nice, simple way of defining IHS that we might present to the group here. And then that would be at somewhere in the area of a 6th grade level, so that would be easily understood by folks. And my best effort came up at a 10.4 grade level. And Shannon took that and tried to work at it, and I think got it down to a 7th and something grade level. It's hard to make some complicated concepts simple. But we began working on that, and we included a brief service description, and then kind of what it is, how it works, who can provide it, and what are some of the challenges and what are some of the benefits as an outline. As Shannon, my thought for today, given our time, may be that I think you and I were going to try and add a little more to that, and that perhaps we do that and send it out prior to our next meeting. And so, in other words, sort of table discussion today due to time, and continue to work on that a little bit and send it out and get feedback from the group that way, if that works. And I see Cheryl has her hand up.
Hi, Cheryl Ellis, Director of DEI for DDS. Greg, I was just wondering if we could do it in kind of an FAQ format where there's a question and a response, because sometimes that just makes it easier for families, I know for me sometimes, to follow.
Yeah, this is Greg McMahon, DDS. And what we were working on ended up being in a question and answer. And I think one of the things when we send it out, we'll be asking you is, what other questions might there be that we didn't think of? This was sort of done in isolation. I know I'm not the best person to define what the challenges are. Families and individuals, and I think case managers who work with lots of families are all better people at determining challenges. And we want it to be worded in a way that doesn't make it sound like a horrible thing either. We don't want it just to be a list of everything that could possibly go wrong with IHS, but something that is informative and educational and realistic. So I think we will work on I know that Shannon and I were reaching out to some case managers for some ideas on what they thought were challenges and benefits. We can add that to it and send it out prior between meetings. We don't meet for a while, so that can be homework for the committee.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Yeah, it would be really great for people to take a look at what we sent and to share any feedback you have with regard to the questions that we should be addressing and really anything else. It is really difficult to get it down to the level I think that we want to. And so I think, we'll continue to try to tweak that. But I think taking a look at that service description and giving us your feedback or sending your feedback via email now will be helpful when we do meet again to be able to have a better discussion about it.
This is Greg McMahon from DDS. One other thing I'd ask you to think about is, even in our own discussions, there's been times where our group has said we want a nice, simple, straightforward service description, and then some of our conversations said yes, but we want to know the process. And it's hard to make the process. That makes it even more complicated. So our initial draft wasn't process. It was what is. And what are benefits or challenges. And I think we still need to come up with better ways of describing the processes to get people where they need to be once they understand what the service is. But you'll notice we did not tackle process. And for many of our services, there's a lot of overlap in process as well. So we may be able to work on process as a separate but coordinated effort. Okay, this is Greg from McMahon from DDS. I don't see any further questions or comments, and we are down to our final minute. I just wanted to remind we're not meeting for a little longer than usual due to some holidays thrown in the middle of February. So our next meeting is scheduled for March 6th at 10 o'clock. And so make sure everybody has that on their calendars and is ready to go. If there are no other comments or questions, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Joanne Melise, Living Innovations. Motion to adjourn.
And do I have a second?
Maricruz Ortiz, Benford, Connecticut. I second that.
Here, here.
So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Bye, guys.
All right. Thank you all and have a good month.
Thank you very well.
You too.